Pressure? Liquefied?
Earlier this year, there was a Fox-produced, Disney-released, nobody-marketed movie called Underwater, a high-concept horror survival film set at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, where some miners accidentally release a deadly scary monster they probably shouldn't have. And even though many of you most likely don't know / never knew about this movie, I do, and I did. This because Underwater is yet another original concept movie that sold back in 2015. And since we just had Gemini Man badly hurt the original concept movie market that has already been hurting since the very first Iron Man, I was really hoping for this one to be good. I was really hoping for this one to do good at the box office. But of course, you know. And it really is a bummer, because not only do I always root for original movies, I also think the concept here had an insane amount of potential. And to be fair, there is some great stuff in here. The Godzilla-like intro title sequence is one of the most effective mood setters I've ever seen, and probably the best part of the movie. The music is fantastic, the production design with all the sets and suits is amazing. The underwater cinematography is very hauntingly striking, and I really enjoyed how they organically play with light at the pitch black bottom of the ocean.
Oh my god! Kepler exploded! Kepler!
Plus, we have a bunch of shots of Kristen Stewart running around in her underwear, which is pretty nice if you're into that kind of stuff.
And who's that? Oh, it's Sam!
Unfortunately, not even Kristen Stewart's underwear is enough to salvage this movie from being a bland, mediocre, overall very forgettably unimpressive horror flick that never stood a chance at the theaters. Because all that stuff I just mentioned aside, this movie completely fails at the one very core thing it's supposed to get right, being a horror survival monster film. Basically, Underwater is like an underwater version of one of the most legendary, most imitated high-concept horror survival monster movies ever, Alien. And when I'm telling you it's like an underwater version of Alien, I mean, that's what it is.
I think it's a distress signal from one of the pods.
A transmission? Out here?
Yeah. SOS.
Something all over it.
There's a layer of mist just...
Pressure? Liquefied?
What is that thing?
What the hell is that?
But despite trying to recreate Alien, Underwater just doesn't seem to understand what makes movies like Alien, which causes massive fundamental problems throughout its entire runtime, from beginning of the first act all the way to the third act finale. It has a character problem with horror, it has a plot problem with survival, it has a monster problem with the monster. In other words, it has a problem of being a horror survival monster movie. And so today, let's see how exactly that happened. Let's dive down deep underwater and compare it to the movie it tries to be to see what it is that makes it fail at it. Here's how not to Alien. What aliens seem to understand all the way back in the 70s is that the only way the horror aspect of a horror film is ever gonna work is if we care about the characters and thus fear for their lives. And so before we get into the inciting plot incident where our characters decide to go check out a distress call, the movie spends a good 12 minutes on this day in the life of section that introduces the characters in their natural everyday habitat. I'm not saying it makes us care about the characters as deeply as it maybe could, but it does establish a basic baseline of who they are.
Possible intelligent origin must be investigated.
I don't want to hear it.
We don't know that's intelligent.
I want to go home and party.
So that we understand how they change when they're yanked out of their natural habitat by the plot. Because understanding how characters change is what makes them three-dimensional and worth caring for. Underwater, on the other hand, tries its luck with an entirely different, more streamlined approach. Because instead of opening on characters in their natural habitat to establish a baseline of who they are, it opens like this. Before Before we get even a chance to understand who our characters are or what makes them tick, the movie suddenly flicks on the inciting incident of the underwater base starting to go bust and thrusts us into the main plot of what this movie is. And even though I'm all for quickly introducing the plot, completely skipping over this day in the life of baseline section does carry massive issues. Firstly, it reduces the weight of the personality revealing choices and actions that the characters have to make. For example, the first big decision moment where Kristen Stewart has to choose whether or not to leave her co-workers behind.
Close the door! We have to close the door, otherwise the whole rig will die. Shut the door now!
Kristen Stewart sentencing her co-workers to death on paper is a big character revealing moment, but the problem is that at this point we have zero clue who she is as a person or what choice she would have usually made. Is she the kind of gal who really cares about other people and so has to make a tough decision here? Or is she the kind of gal who only cares about herself and so doesn't really have to decide at all? No clue. And because we have no clue of the weight that her choice carries, it just ends up feeling weightless and thus brings us no closer to her as a person. Secondly, starting straight with the inciting incident also very easily turns characters into passive blank shells who, instead of making any choices and actions of their own, just react to the incident incited upon them. When we meet TJ Miller, all he wants to do is escape the combusting station and nothing else, which means that all that we ultimately know about him as a character is that he's quirky and funny because he's TJ Miller. And compared to the rest of the characters here, that's actually pretty good.
I don't really know. I watched a lot of anime, that's all I know.
You watch anime? I like anime.
I watched a lot of anime, that's all I know.
You watch anime? I like anime.
Thirdly, skipping over the day in the life of section also ruins relationships between characters and makes each one of them only about this inciting incident. Every relationship here, for example, is the exact same. The characters are all collegial friends who just wanna work together to escape the combusting station. And we have no idea if there's something deeper there, if there's complicated romances, heated rivalries, secret jealousies. We have no idea if there's any conflict, which is the same as there not being any conflict. It's just a bunch of two-dimensional people working nicely together to escape this combusting station, and that's not interesting.
Captain, there better be a good punchline because the setup is
So
weak.
And overall, the main problem is that we just don't care about these characters. When Stewart leaves her co-workers behind, we have no idea who they are and we don't care. When we find this dead woman, we have no idea who she is and we don't care. When this black guy dies and makes Stewart feel bad, we had no idea who he was and we don't care.
Rodrigo, right?
And imagine if we did care. Imagine if we, for example, spent time at the beginning to set up a secret romance relationship between him and her, where they're planning to live a life together once their work here is done. Suddenly, his death would mean much more to Stewart and to us. Suddenly, we feel there's a reason for us to fear for the lives of these characters as they're facing these terrible horrors of the depth. Imagine that. The thing that makes Alien such a memorable and highly intense survival movie is the fact that it's told from the very epicenter of the plot event it revolves around. When the crew of the Nostromo goes to answer the distress call, they inadvertently bring the alien on board their own ship and have to overcome the obstacles that creates. In other words, they have to survive the consequences of their own actions, which not only makes the survival element organic, but also deeply tensely personal. And in Underwater, there is a very similar crux of a plot of humans sticking their noses in places where they shouldn't and then having to survive the consequences of that.
We did this. We drilled the bottom of the ocean. And we took too much. And now she's taking back.
The only problem is, the characters we follow aren't actually the ones sticking their noses in a place they shouldn't. They didn't cause this station combustion to happen, it just happened upon them. They didn't drill the earth to make it spit out these deadly creatures that begin hunting them, they're just caught in the area of it. They aren't trying to escape the bottom of the ocean because of something they did, but just because of something someone else did.
I don't get it. Was it like an earthquake or...
I don't know.
As in, our protagonists aren't facing the consequences and obstacles of their own creation, but instead those of someone else's. And why is this an issue? Well, here's why. First of all, it creates an unavoidable feeling like we're watching an inferior second-rate version of a much more interesting movie. I think the main topic of humans drilling the bottom of the ocean and going too deep is very inherently fascinating. And whenever our characters are looking at the drill and wondering what the hell happened down there, that's exactly what I wonder. I wonder if the incident was very sudden or if deadly creatures started to creep up bit by bit. I wonder if there was conflict and fights between the drillers about whether or not to continue going deeper. I wonder if there were elements like obsession and greed and descent into madness that factored into what happened. But all I can do is wonder, because this movie isn't that. This movie isn't about surviving the epicenter of its main plot event, but instead just about surviving the outer edges of that epicenter. And that's a bummer. Also, when your main characters aren't the ones causing the plot to happen, it very easily leads to randomness and confusion as to what is going on.
Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna drop down to the cargo elevator to the seafloor. Then use the access tunnel to get to the midpoint station. And then we follow the markers across the plateau to the roebuck.
The main plot of walking to another part of the station in order to escape is very clear, but the issue is that I have no clue what that means in practice. I don't know what the roebuck is or where it is, because we've never been there to use it or to even see it. I don't know why walking to it in the suits would be dangerous, because we've never been outside before. I don't know why we have a time limit to get there, because we don't even know for sure what caused this combustion to happen. None of this stuff has been established visually, because our characters weren't there at the epicenter to set it all in motion. Instead, it's all just built on what the characters say.
30 minutes till meltdown, and it's gonna blow us into tiny pieces when it surface. Not everyone here is an experienced diver, and core of the Kepler is completely unstable. Can you just admit we might die doing that? The suits can't be down there that long, you know that.
No, I don't.
What's happening now, baby?
Well,
apparently there was some other crew here who went to check out some kind of a distress call and got attacked by some kind of scary thing, I guess, and once they came back on the ship apparently some kind of deadly alien burst out of one of them, and now that deadly alien is hunting us as well, I guess.
And in addition to confusion, this bystander in someone else's movie aspect can also make situations and obstacles seem insignificant and without purpose. When our characters go investigate a distress call, unlike in Alien, it ultimately contributes nothing to the plot other than just introduce the existence of monsters, which kinda happens anyway. And so it just ends up feeling like a pointless waste of time. And when we're not taking pointless detours, all that we're essentially doing is waiting for elevators to go down, or waiting for carts to go forward, or waiting for monsters to kill or not kill us. Because since we had nothing to do with what happened here, that's all we can do. Just flow through the leftover scraps of what happened. Look, not every movie can or should be about the very epicenter of an event. But if your movie is about surviving an event and about nothing else, then maybe your hero should have something to do with that event. Because otherwise, it might very well turn your movie into a film equivalent of a boring, pointless walking simulator. Everything we've talked about aside, the one thing Alien is remembered for above all else is its super duper scary monster, for good reason. And even though a lot of it has to do with its ingenious design, you have to also give credit to the masterful way the movie establishes it narratively. Basically, the alien is built up to being this perfect, unstoppable organism existing only to kill every living being, and that if it gets away, it can spread to more populated areas and ultimately extinguish all life. And so, since our heroes are the ones who personally brought it to life, we better not let it get away. And to Underwater's credit, I'd say it does build up this creepy, unknown atmosphere of the bottom of the Mariana Trench very well. The intro sequence especially, incredible. But once it actually starts to acknowledge the existence of a scary monster, the whole build-up quickly comes crumbling down. And it's all because of just one letter.
Oxygen scrubber took a hit.
We all saw this, right? There are things out there.
Unlike in Alien, in Underwater there is not something out out there, but instead some things. And when it comes to constructing a genuinely scary movie monster, this is a huge problem. Because once you establish that your monster exists in plural form, whether it is your intention or not, you subconsciously plant the idea in the audience's head that one monster isn't enough. That we shouldn't be afraid of the monster, but instead of the numbers it comes in. And to actually showcase what I'm trying to say, take this moment at the beginning of the third act, for example. When Kristen Stewart blasts the monster just as it's eating her and then emerges from its lifeless corpse, that'd be a kick-ass awesome ending moment to any great horror movie. But the reason that's not the case here is the fact that it's not an ending moment, because there's a bunch more of these monsters right there beside her, which not only ruins the moment, but also the monster itself. Kristen Stewart does beat this monster in a cool way and survive, yes, but so what? There's a lot more of them just waiting right there. And now those monsters in of themselves just don't seem so scary anymore, because we've now established them as being disposable mortal creatures that can be stopped with just one shot from a gun. They are still a threat, definitely, but not as much in a scary monster movie way, but more in an action thriller movie way. Because in movies, just like in real life, things are scary only until we realize we shouldn't be afraid of them. 1,000 5-year-old kids could definitely kill you, but that doesn't mean 5-year-old kids are scary. And in addition to making the monster not scary, the movie also fails at building a personal relationship between our heroes and the monster like in Alien. Because not only does it make there be multiple monsters, it also then out of nowhere decides to go all J.J. Abrams on us and introduce this other slightly bigger monster. Once the not Cloverfield monster shows up, we then get to the ending choice where Kristen Stewart sends her friends up in escape pods and stays behind to blow up the station to kill it as well as the smaller monsters, to make sure they don't get to her friends or the human race on the surface, kinda like Ripley stopping the alien. But the difference is that here the reason to do this is never established. The not Cloverfield monster just pops up out of nowhere without any build-up, meaning that there's nothing to indicate that it wants to go to the surface or that it should be viewed as a threat to anyone, especially those who aren't drilling up its home. There's nothing to indicate that the smaller monsters could stop the escape pods, seeing that they had trouble harming our heroes when they were just in their diving suits, or that they could even survive a trip to the surface in the first place. They or the not Cloverfield monster aren't ever established as perfect killing machines that need to be prevented from spreading like the alien. And so this whole self-sacrifice finale moment just ends up feeling undeserving and meaningless. In general, that's kind of what this whole movie ends up feeling like. Like Alien, but undeserving and meaningless.